What's goody, fam? So today in this video, I'm going to be running you through some investments and wealth creation basics. So I'm not going to be giving you any advice here. I'm just going to run you through some stuff that really try and get your head back down to earth and really give you some tips and some tricks that when you're investing, you're going to be not low risk, but lower risk, more efficient, foolproof strategies to get ahead. The biggest problem we see with investors is getting overconfident in bull markets, which we're seeing now. We saw a couple of years ago and we saw in the GFC. When markets are running hot, it's easy to make money. The real test is keeping that money long term so that it's ready for when you need it. So when you're into all these hot topic assets and making a little bit of money here and there and think that it's never going to end, that's when you're in real danger. We have a bit of a saying in the industry that when the taxi man or someone at the barbecue is telling you about a stock, that's when it's time to sell. Because you got to understand that when somebody tells you about a stock, somebody's not in the industry, somebody's just heard about it. There's somebody who got onto that stock early, like really, really early. And they didn't tell no one because they didn't want to tell someone before in case it went lost, right? In case they lost money, they look like an idiot. So they got in this stock early. Then they made some money. You go, shit, this is all right. I'm going to tell someone about it because I've got a bit of ego now. I want to look cool. I want to look cool. They tell one person about it. That person then starts that process. I'm not going to get on it yet in case it doesn't make money. I'm not going to tell other people about it until it makes money. Then they make a little bit of money on it, right? Shit. Okay, now I'm going to tell some people. And you repeat that process over and over and over again until it gets to you or the person at the barbecue. Now, the chances of that thing still running hot as it did on that person who made 20%, 30%, whatever, slim to none. Very, very small. Because you're way down the line in someone telling about something, and they're not going to tell you that they heard it from someone. They're going to say they researched or they found it or whatever, right? And this is the problem. This is where people lose a lot of money due to overconfidence, ego, and just not thinking and trying to make money quick. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks here, right? First thing I'm going to go through is the fundamentals, right? There is only ever 3 inputs into your wealth creation goal that matter, okay? In the formula of how to get to where you want to be. First one is time, okay? It's the most important, but the one we have the least amount of control over. Now, we have no control over time, but we have control on how we use it, right? And starting now is the best use of your time. So that's the first one, is time. How much time you have between now and when you need that wealth, that portfolio to be at the point you want it to be at to achieve your goals. Then the second one we have is risk or return, okay? So we know there's a risk versus reward relationship in everything we do. And in investing, the more risk you take, the more return, but also the bigger chance of losing your money there is, okay? People tend to forget that down to they think, I take more risk, it just means more money. You've got to understand it also means that you could lose your money quicker as well. That one we have no control of. We have control of how much risk we take, but we have no control over the reward that happens on that end. And the last one we have is contribution. Now, this is the one we have the most control over. How much money we put into our portfolio. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you a calculator to help you understand this a little bit better and hopefully help you understand how to build a investment strategy in line with your goals. Bear with me. All right. This is called a TVM calculator, time value money calculator. You can just Google it. This one's free. You can download them on your phone. They're free. They can come in real handy. So let's just use a typical example, right? So let's use a typical example of a 30-year-old who wants to have a portfolio that funds them from 50 to 60 by 50. And they want 100 grand a year. Yeah, 100 grand a year. Now, in this instance, 100 grand a year is going to be taxed. So 100 grand a year is going to be more like 75, 80 grand. But let's just use this as an example. Actually, no, let's do it properly. So what we want to do is we want to go to PayCal. We're going to go to PayCal website, Pay Calculator website. I want to understand what that looks like. So let's have a look at 100 grand. If you want to earn 100 grand, we're really going to earn 75. Let's bang on, right? Because of the tax component, etc., etc. Let's make sure, it's not including superannuation. Beautiful. So 75,800. So then we just keep rounding it up. Let's figure out what that is. So let's say 120. 120 grand's 88. You see where I'm going with this? It's cost you a lot of money to make 100 grand in the hand. About 140. Now, what we need to consider here is that there's two of us. We're in a relationship. We can utilize our tax systems a little bit better, right? So you see here that $100,000 per annum is going to cost one person 140 to earn, right? If we break that up into two people, we see that's 50 grand off 60,000. That means two people only have to earn a household income of 120,000 a year to achieve the same goal, saving yourself $20,000 a year, which is a lot of money. And this comes into income splitting, etc. But that's another story. But just in this instance, we're going to say we need 120. Okay, so the portfolio is to generate 120. And we'll have two owners of the shares, and we'll split that across. So let's use that as an example. So we want to generate $100,000 in $120,000 in retirement for 10 years. So let's say put in periods 10, change to annual. Let's just use 8%. It's probably going to be a bit lower. No, let's just use 8% now. Future value, we want the portfolio worth 0 over that 10 years. So from 50 to 60, we don't have any money left. We want $120,000 coming out. So what does that portfolio need to be? You need to have $805,000, $805,209, right? So let's call it 800 grand in a portfolio to generate you $120,000 a year for 10 years at an 8% interest rate. Now, when we start talking about the relationship, right? If we wanted to only draw 100, which was $75,000 after tax, then we'd only need 671, right? So we changed the external contribution amount, but let's keep it 120. Let's say we're only comfortable in generating 6%, right? So we're changing the risk versus reward, the return. We're changing the risk. Well, in that instance, we're going to need closer to 900,000. But let's say now we actually want that money to last us 20 years. Well, now we're going to need over $1 million, right? So you can change all these functionalities to really, what level of return am I comfortable achieving? How much do I really need? How long do I want to last? Well, you can play around with this to really build what that portfolio looks like and needs to be for you. So let's go back to the 800 grand. So we need $800,000, right? So right now, let's say we're starting with 0. If you've got a portfolio ready, you can sort of start, you can add that in. In 20 years, so we're 30, right? We want it by 50. We want 800 grand in this portfolio. We're going to run a return rate of 8%. I'm pretty comfortable at our age. We can get a 8% return using index funds, which I'll show you in a minute. And we've got 20 years to do so. So then this will tell you, you need to be putting in $17,481.77. Now, if you want to get real into it, you should. You can then go back to PayCalc and figure out what that looks like from a tax position. But using, average tax rate of 30% just to be safe. So you gross that up. Now, you got to keep in mind that number is how much needs to be invested. How much needs to hit the portfolio to be invested together. So if there's fees and taxes inside that portfolio, you need to understand that and you need to make sure you take that into account. But let's just say, for argument's sake, what's going on here? Let's just say for argument's sake that, we've taken that all into account. So then what you do is you get your calculator and you put that number in, let's call it 17.5. And we divide that by, let's call it 30%. So 70. So you need to be contributing round number of $25,000 a year into that portfolio over 20 years to generate that 800 grand. Cool. So then you can play around. Like I said, you want a bit more, put more in. You want a lesser return, change the return. You want lesser years, change the years, right? And you go through the calculator, and it'll tell you everything you need. Right, 42 grand. Now, if you have a lump sum, so that's if you change it. Now, if you have a lump sum, right, so you have a bit of money there and you're trying to figure out what to do with that money, this is where this can help as well. Because you might say, well, I'm only willing to put in $25,000 a year into this portfolio. Actually, no, let's say we're not going to make any contributions. We want to know how much money we can dump into a portfolio. Let's say you get an inheritance or something and let it run itself, right? And I want it to be worth $1 million in 20 years. And I'm going to get an 8% return over that 20 years, but I don't want to put any contribution. I don't want to make any payments. So how much do I need to put into a portfolio at that rate over that time period to get that? All right, you need about 215 grand, okay? So these are the things you need to look at. You need to look at this stuff to understand what that looks. Now let's take that into consideration. This is where the power of time and compounding interest comes in. In this scenario, to make $1 million in 20 years, it's only going to cost you 215 grand, right? You dump 215 grand in now and you'll make $1 million in 20 years. But if you were to do it the other way that we look at, right, that we were talking about. So we said $25,000 you need to do over 20 years. It's going to cost you 500 grand. That is the power. That is the power of compounding interest. Yeah, that is the power of compounding interest. Now, what's the risk to doing lump sum investments versus consistent investments? Well, the first one is market risk. Okay, if you put that 215 grand in and overnight it drops, it could take you 10 years to get back to where it was, i.e. the GFC. So that's a risk because you're timing the market. Second risk, opportunity risk. What if something pops up in that time that you could make better money or do more things with that money that you just lotted into that investment portfolio? That's a big one as well. And last one's flexibility risk. Okay, things might change in your scenario where you need that money. So there's pros and cons to everything. There's no one way fits all, but you can see the power of compounding interest can really significantly save you a lot of money, but there's risk to every decision we make, risk versus reward, right? So you can blend that up. You can say, what if I put 100 grand in, how much do I need to do, right? So I'll put 100 grand in. How much do I need to add on top of that per year? Okay, 11 grand, right? It's much better than the 25. So you can build and blend using this formula. You can build and blend the right outcome for you for your investment portfolio. Yeah. And this is all the stuff that we do for our clients, right? You can see it's a lot more than just what shares do you pick, bro? There's heaps more to it than that, right? So we look at those numbers, we have a look. Now, then we come down to the debate around lump sum investments, so dumping money in the market and leaving it, versus dollar cost averaging. So dollar cost averaging is where we consistently buy the market. Yeah, we set up a direct debit and we just keep buying. Now that means you're going to buy stocks sometimes higher than others, you're going to buy them lower than others. But what it means is we know that we don't know in the next 12 months what the stock market could do. You know, there's analysis and there's people, but it could go down, it could go up, right? But we know that in 20 years it's likely to go up significantly. So that's what we're doing here. We're making sure that if we look at the way that a chart works, or the way that if we look at the way that stocks move, right, generally they go up much slower than how quickly they come down, right? So if you're always buying, right, on the chart that goes left, you're always buying, you're more likely more times than not, you're going to be buying that stock cheaper than what you're going to be buying at a future date. And if it drops rapidly, then we're going to be buying that rapidly and we're going to be buying at a much cheaper price, and then it's going to start going up again, right? That's generally how it works. So the idea of dollar cost averaging is that you're more times than not buying a stock cheaper at that date than what it's going to be worth in the future. Yeah, you're buying the stock less times at a discounted rate to what you bought it at originally. That's the idea. Okay, now you're not always going to do it, but more times than not you are, and that's what we're doing. We're playing with the variables and the known variables and trying to control as much as we can. And that's where dollar cost averaging comes into it. But as you can see, it can cost you more than lump sum. So a blend of the two is always a good option. So the next thing I want to show you is some tools to use, right? Some tools to use. So that's the TVM calculator, time value money calculator. We've got pay calculator as well, but this is a page I really want to show you is the Vanguard tools. So if you go to Vanguard is one of the world's greatest market leaders in passive investments, yeah, in market-driven investments. Brilliant. You know, Warren Buffett is often being heard quoted saying that when he dies, he's going to leave all his money to Vanguard because nobody can do what he does, and he believes that, you know, running the market is the best way to go outside of himself. So this is really, really important that you have a look at them. There's other companies like BetterShares or BlackRock who are really good as well. Some really good passive investors out there. But this is not saying that passive is better than active. So active is when someone trades, and it's not better than hedge funds. What it's saying is if you don't have the skills to trade and you're not going to go and use somebody who does have the skills, this is your best option because you don't know jack shit. Okay, you don't know sweet fuck all, and the market is right more times than not if you don't know what you're doing. So this is the most efficient way to get you from point A to point B without looking at your portfolio every 3 seconds and just making sure it's as simple, as efficient as you can make it. And I highly recommend it to anyone who is out there trying to invest for themselves. Stop trying to be Warren Buffett, because you haven't done the studies done, you haven't been in the business as long as him, you haven't put the work in, you're just out there cowboying it. This is the way to go most times for you guys if you're not using someone who knows better. So you can jump on the Vanguard page, and they've got some great stuff. They can compare funds. There's an interactive index chart, asset class tool, which we're going to go through in a minute, some fees calculator, currency impact calculator, ETF fee comparison calculator, and some other things across their page that are brilliant. But today we're going to go into the asset class chart test, right? So if you look at this chart and just think of what I said 2 seconds ago, more times than not, this chart is going up. When it comes down much faster than how long it takes to go up, right? So if we look at any given asset class, it's a lot slower incline to the top and a much faster decline, yeah? So if you're always buying, you're more likely than not going to be buying stocks cheaper than at a future date, okay? That's how dollar cost averaging works. So let's go back to where I was on this screen. So this is the asset class. What I want you to look at here, and this is for you, property, crypto's better than this, or property's better than shares, or shares are better than property. Have a look at this, right? From 1970 to today, this is how your asset classes performed across the board. But US shares, the S&P 500 has done 11.6% on average, year in, year out. Your international shares have done 9.8, so international shares not including the US. Aussie shares done 9.6, Aussie property 8.2. Oh no, would you believe that? And that's gross. That's gross. That's before fees and taxes and everything. So how's that for an argument? Australian bonds 8%, cash 7.7%. Won't be seeing that for a while. International bonds hedge 6.5%, international property 5.1%. And then on the next two columns, you see the minimum versus maximum return. So the biggest drawdown for US shares has been 29.2%. International shares 28.9, Australian shares 40.4, Australian property 54, Australian bonds 10.1, cash 0.4, international bonds 3.2, and international property 29.2, and then the max. So the biggest gains 62.6 for US shares, 70.8 for international shares, etc., etc. So when we talk about risk versus reward, when people say property is safer than shares, history shows us that's complete full of shit, because you're getting a lower return with a bigger drawdown than any other asset class, and by far not the biggest gain, right? So for anyone out there with the property versus shares debate, come talk to me, because this pictures it perfectly, right? But that's not me saying properties are better than shares. Shares are better than property, nothing. This is just me waking you guys up, because you all know by now that I love all assets and they all have their pros, their cons, and their purpose. And this is saying to us is that diversification is key. You trying to pick one stock, right? Like professionals struggle to even pick an asset class for the year, let alone you're trying to pick one stock out of the millions out there that's going to perform really well. You're fucking kidding, right? So jump on here, have a look. This will help you build a portfolio. Now, when you see people, I've just used the biggest mark here, right? Full transparency. I've just used from here to there. If you talk to a professional who tries to pick out, you can pick any decade, right? Look, I just changed it to a random one and watch those numbers change, right? So if I wanted to make Australian property look better than shares, I'd do something like that. I'd go from 1990 to 2000 something, right? If I wanted to see like Australian shares 10.1 versus Australian property, I could make, there's enough information out there. There's enough information out there that you could find anything to support your argument if you're not looking at things holistically. And so that's what we always say. The biggest three things our clients face is too much information, no clear strategy, and not enough time, right? It's not that you can't do it, it's that you won't and you don't know what you're doing, right? You can learn it, but it's going to take, by the time you figure out and learn it, you're going to miss the mark. So what I want to show you today is I wanted to show you a bit of the investment basics and understanding what's really in your control versus what's not. And understanding that if you really want to get into the investment market, focus on the things you control. Look at more passive market investments if you're not going to use a professional, because there's a very likely chance you don't know what you're doing. And that's the most efficient way for you to get ahead without taking too much risk and without looking at your portfolio every 2 seconds. And the third one is diversification is key. across any given year, different assets have performed each other. But long term, we know that strategic asset allocation is king, right? So make sure you have a diverse portfolio and you're investing in assets that align with the purpose of what that portfolio is trying to do, whether it's retirement, passive income, a stable growth platform, whatever it is, align your investment with the purpose. So I hope that helped. If you've got any questions, please reach out, but I'm hoping you get a bit of education off the back of that. And you can start, retweak your portfolios or get a bit more efficient, or come and see us and we can help you go forward as well.